Welcome back, Audrey Lustgarten, Global Managing Partner of WR Immigration. We all know her, we all love her. Thanks for joining us on the Business Immigration Benchmark. Today, we're covering the Global Immigration Program Alignment Benchmarking Survey. Before we dive in, Audrey, can you give us some top-level key points of what we learned from the survey?
Yeah, definitely. And thanks for having me, Laura. Always fun to be with you here and super excited to have a global benchmarking survey. We've been waiting slightly impatiently while the US had all their benchmarking surveys. So just excited to have the results, kind of get a pulse on what people are thinking, what people are doing out there. At a high level, I think that we heard a lot of the themes that we hear day in and day out in terms of challenges in aligning US immigration programs with global programs, struggles with time zone coordination, different rules in different jurisdictions, staying up to date on everything. Data was a huge pain point as well, having a centralized source for your data rather than broken up in a dozen different countries was a pain point. Although we also saw that, quite a few respondents said that they actually did not think that the lack of alignment between their U.S. and global programs was really bad. There was a significant proportion that was managing okay. Although I have to say, some of these folks are our clients, so I guess I'm happy that they're not saying they have a huge lack of alignment because that would be a problem for me. Hopefully, we're helping
Sure.
them with that. But yeah, definitely some pros, some cons, and a lot of good insights in this benchmarking report.
Well, cool. Let's dive into it. So we fielded the survey from September 12th through November 8th, 2024, so Q4 of last year, which is not that long ago, but feels like ages ago as we're recording here at the end of January. The survey length on average was about 11 minutes to complete. So this one was a little bit lengthy, and you could tell because there was just like a lot of selection of countries folks are involved in. So a lot of selections there that probably increased the length. We collected this directly online with HR, immigration, and global mobility professionals. 37 responded, and on average, 12 years of experience for those respondents. The average program size was 250 US foreign nationals, 18 countries globally, with 242 global immigration matters in 2023 on average. So you gave us a high-level perspective of the Global Immigration Program Alignment Survey. Can you tell us a little bit more about things that surprised you or jumped out in the data?
Yeah, I think one thing that really surprised me is, as I mentioned just a moment ago, the decline in the in-house global mobility team size. And we noticed that there was a decline amongst respondents in global mobility teams with 3 or more members. So it seems like folks are trending to having just 1 to 2 in-house global mobility team members to manage everything, which is a bit surprising. I mean, maybe not shocking, as companies are always cost conscious and cutting back and keeping an eye on that. But it's just an awful lot for those 1 to 2 team members to be managing, US programs along with global programs. I mean, Laura, you mentioned, 18 countries around the world. Like, that's a lot to have on your plate. And now, particularly with, some of the challenges with the new administration in the US, like there's a lot going on here. So adding global on top of that and limiting team sizes to 1 to 2 is a little surprising. I guess it makes your selection of your technology and your vendor really important because people with such a small team really need to lean on their technology and their vendors, I think, to make this possible.
Yeah, it made me think, do you think the leadership in these organizations are assuming technology is solving for efficiency, that technology is solving, the work or the tasking for additional team members? Is that maybe part of it?
It could be part of it, and I've actually had some informal chats with a few of the respondents, who are not our clients, which was kind of fun to, like, okay, get that perspective as well.
Sure.
And I don't know that it's so much that they're assuming that, AI is gonna do everything for us, as hearing from a lot of them, it was just that their leadership was a little out of touch with how much
Okay.
work, immigration really is day in and day out. It might be that their leadership is, has responsibility over multiple different departments and just doesn't understand the nuance of immigration and the sheer workload when you have, concerned foreign nationals reaching out to you at all hours of the day and night, and keeping up with that can really be a challenge.
Yeah, I mean, even just trying to coordinate if you're the 1 or even 2 people managing world time zones, it's even
Yeah.
just difficult to imagine, like, how you're ever directly communicating. Like, I had to schedule a call with a client in India, one realizing that they're on, like, the half hour
Yeah.
was confusing to me. But then to try to get, my client contact in New York and the gentleman in India all on the phone call is like, there's like 1 hour
Yeah.
that sort of everyone can accommodate on a
Yeah.
Thursday 2 weeks from now, right? Like, I
Welcome to
just,
my
like
world, Laura.
so one person's trying to manage that for a
Oh my
company that
goodness.
is in 18
Yeah.
jurisdictions or, I mean, even just a handful like
Yeah.
that could be incredibly difficult.
Absolutely. No, it's exhausting, and I mean, but people
Yeah.
do it. I was on a call with a client just earlier today, and we're trying to arrange a call at similar, like, a very challenging spread of countries, and she's like, "Well, if I have to get up at 2 a.m. and take the call, I will." And I'm like, "My goodness,
Wow,
you're
dedicated.
dedicated. You're
Yeah.
amazing. I love you, but that gets tiring for 1 to 2 people to be covering all of that. It's a lot."
Yeah, like, you wonder if that's sustainable, in
Yeah.
these moments where there are dynamic periods of administration change, not just in the US, but it sounds like, we'll talk a little bit more about some of the other jurisdictions that are challenging that, maybe you could sustain that for a few months, but it definitely feels like too much. What jumped out to me is that the majority of these companies, 62%, believe that the lack of alignment between internal immigration teams located globally is not a significant factor impacting performance.
Yeah.
Yeah, how do you interpret that? Like, I think it's a confusing question.
Listen.
So breaking it down, it's like the majority of respondents said that they didn't feel like there was a lack of alignment globally, on performance, and I think performance, you can sort of say, "Well, how are we defining performance? Is that
Mhm.
success of application? Is that
Yeah.
speed?" But I think we're just trying to sort of say generally, but
Yeah.
even still, I was sort of shocked about this one. So,
Mhm.
can you tell me more about why we think majority of people are not seeing a breakdown here
Yeah.
or saying that they're not?
Yeah. Yeah, they're feeling optimistic at the end of the
Which is
year.
great.
No, it's good, but it's not an absolute crisis. But I think that, well, I mean, first, I hope lots of them are WR clients and they're just happily aligned because we're helping them. But amongst those that aren't, I think there's a few different things that could be going on. They could be working with, a vendor that's taking a lot of the lift for them in terms of helping to align. Or it could just be, that that they're okay with having a little bit of a siloed approach, that, the fact that everything isn't centralized and isn't aligned, maybe isn't an issue for their company. They're still getting approvals, they're still able to conduct business as usual. And, trying to centralize a program, trying to align US and global, and have like the same policies and protocols and all of that. It's a big lift. So it may just be that, that centralization is not necessarily a priority for a lot of the respondents to the survey. And that's valid. It's not necessarily the right thing for everyone. I mean, I think there are a lot of
Right.
benefits to having alignment and consistency. When you've got someone transferring from one country to another, they're not like, wow, the immigration policy is totally different here. Or, you don't have data, and so you don't know where in the world you have people. But also I would say, although, what is it? 62% is a pretty big number. I think 38% is not insignificant either, where they really are saying that they are struggling with a lack of alignment between the US and the global program. And I also think some of the comments we got later on, where we gave folks more of an opportunity to explain and elaborate, indicate that although maybe they answered no to this question, there are still significant challenges that they're facing. So it could also be chalked up to, it was, as you said, Laura, a little bit of a compound, confusing question. The challenge is just also we don't want to, give people a survey with 115 questions on it. So as much as I would love to get that data,
Yeah,
got to balance between, keeping it to the point so that
sure.
busy people have time to complete it.
The other thing that just made your answer made me think about is, and we're working through this on a number of clients
Yeah.
that had these siloed global programs that were successful, right?
Yeah.
In the sense that their foreign national population in those countries were really happy with the service,
Yeah.
but that sort of more of a global HR reorganization or a global initiative to sort of consolidate things then is sort of pulling everything to maybe that one or two central leaders in the US. And then now there's sort of the pain of aligning it. So, I don't know. I mean, now I can kind of almost see it in the reverse where that's the old-timey saying, like, if it's not broke, don't fix it, where, like, if you've got a successful program running out of Canada and it's working really well, like, maybe it suits your organization to, keep these part and parcel. I think what we're hearing from our clients that we're working with that wanna align it is it's really like a data situation that they wanna consolidate, and that with individual vendors, that's very difficult, or your in-house person is probably, like, managing that,
Yeah.
independently, so
I think, yeah, you can have siloed programs that work. I think the siloed programs that work, though, that one or two people are not responsible globally for
Right,
a
yes,
high or don't have a high degree of responsibility. They're not filing those applications. They're not tracking.
right,
They're not having to report on the data. Just the local folks are getting it done. I think once it becomes, if there is some sort of a shift or a reorganization and that one to two people become responsible for it globally, that's where a siloed approach just stops working and starts to break down because them coordinating across 18 different jurisdictions quickly becomes a nightmare. And you need someone to really
right,
support and facilitate that so all of the burden is not falling internally. And the other thing is, and we've got this with a few clients right now, like M&A activity will bring this to the forefront. It will force centralization in a very compressed and painful time frame. So, yeah, that is, I think, food for thought. Like, if that's possibly in the company's future, like getting your arms around the data in advance is often a good idea.
yeah, or, like, we're learning, like, when a program has operated solo successfully, bunny quotes, when it's now audited to come into and roll up into that central you
Yeah,
realize there's been such non-compliance issues, right?
absolutely.
I know we're dealing with that right now.
Yeah.
And that, yeah, so maybe the saying, "If it's not broken, don't fix it." But audit, maybe audit.
Yeah, audit's
Maybe
always
auditing's good.
audit's always a good idea. When you've got, like, the time before it becomes, a necessity or a crisis, audit. And the other thing that can trigger kind of this crisis where, like, "Oh, dear, we need to centralize," is, things like the pandemic or things like a war or even a change of administration in a significant jurisdiction. Things that kinda there are other things as well that can be a catalyst for, "Oh, we need to know something. Where in the world are our people? What citizenship do they have? What impact is this natural disaster or crisis or big legislative change going to have?" And it's hard to do that when you don't have a centralized place for the data.
Yeah, no kidding. Okay, so moving on, some other pain points we sort of briefly touched on in talking about alignment is changing regulations,
Yeah.
decentralized data systems, time zone management. What are some ways that you work with your clients to mitigate some of these pain points? We've touched a little bit on them, so you can kind of grab whichever one speaks here we haven't covered yet.
No, definitely. And those were kind of the big pain points that most of the survey respondents reported.
Yeah,
Changing regulations, I mean, really, again, having centralized data to where you can pinpoint who's going to be impacted by the changing regulations is key. So the approach that we take is that we do alerts. We'll either do like monthly alert if it's something not urgent, or a that day alert if it's a big change or a crisis, or executive orders gone awry, and then we'll run reports for clients to be like, okay, let's look at who in your population is going to be impacted by this change in regulation, or let's look at which pending cases might be impacted by the regulation to really give them concrete guidance on, okay, this is the impact to you. Decentralized data, I mean, that's fairly easy for us. We're lucky with Rapid. We can just put everything in our system. Everything is integrated, and we don't have the problem. Even if on the client side, the data is decentralized, we serve as a point of centralization. And we do that as part of onboarding. It's like auditing the data, uploading the data, and then everything lives in Rapid as our single source of truth. And then time zone management, I mean, can't fix the time zones. You can just kind of work around them. The thing
Yeah.
that I love that we do is the automated scheduling with Calendly, and our calendars are integrated. So if someone needs to schedule a call that includes me, my, case manager that's in LA and my local advisor that's in London, for example, it's a link that we give and it automatically combines our calendars and the client can just choose whichever one they want. Like it's such a small, simple thing
Yeah.
that is honestly life-changing because you don't have that back
So
and
big.
forth trying to find that, half hour to your point, like 2 Thursdays from now that might work for
Yeah.
everyone. They can just like click and it's instant.
Yeah, no kidding. I mean, that was using the Calendly, but it's like one of
Still,
those
no one
things
was
where like,
available. Well, yeah, again,
yeah.
you can't fix availability either, so
Yeah, it was more of an availability thing than it was the
the back and
function
forth.
of the application. Yes. It seems like from my review of the benchmarking survey, teams are evenly split on the topic of global policy standardization. So this meaning like you have a policy in UK that applies to sponsored foreign nationals, there's a policy in the US for sponsored foreign nationals. And so tell us how you advise clients. What's your takeaway from this?
Yeah.
Anything, for our listeners here for what's your take on global policy standardization?
Yeah, I mean, again, I'm a little biased. I love standard global policies where everything's neatly
Fair.
wrapped up into one policy. It is a big lift, though, again, for these poor 1 to 2 people who are managing things globally.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I would say, sometimes you have to take baby steps, start in if you don't have a centralized policy, if you want to develop one, I mean, I usually say start in your largest jurisdictions where you have the most foreign nationals, like develop the policy there and then see if you can expand it out to cover the other countries. And usually if you're keeping things generic enough, so not saying, specifically we will sponsor perm, blah, 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 but rather saying we sponsor permanent residents if you meet these criteria. If you keep it generic, you can usually then kind of slot in any nuances from the other countries. For example, in Canada, permanent residents don't have to be sponsored by the company. There's a way they can apply directly. So you might have to pull it out or, add some nuance there so that the policy makes sense in all those different countries. But if you start with your largest jurisdiction, write it in a generic way and then add on the countries as you can. That means that you don't have to do everything all at once. It's kind of more bite size. And also, I mean, what I often will tell my clients to do is like, okay, you have a policy in the US, send me your policy. And we can help you to insert what needs to be different for the other countries and help you make it more generic so that it can cover things for you globally. So I would say don't hesitate to lean on your vendor as well. They're not just there to process cases, but to provide strategic guidance.
Yeah, and that's the fun part. A term I picked up from one of the guests we had on the podcast, Melissa Schur, shout out Melissa. She referred to the term guides, that she sort of was getting away from like policy and she was using the term guides as far as, sponsorship, policy, they were guides. And that kind of seems to fit from a global standpoint to your point. Like you kind of have this overarching guide that then you have to sort of pull out like, what does PR mean in Canada versus the US? And those can be very different time frame, very different costs associated, but kind of having this backbone of what your company is willing to do. One of the companies that we work on together, I think their backbone of their guide or policy is, what positions even qualify. So they say like professional or managerial. And so that's really just clear because their banding across the world has those categories. And so I think that makes things just super clear of like, well, this doesn't fit in. And then I think they have the exception policy that we've worked through. So, that there are some exceptions.
Yeah.
Within it, within everything, we're attorneys, right? There's always an exception. But that it makes it really clear and can apply very easily across the world. So
Yeah. And that's again to the point of making it a little bit generic. Like they're identifying
you're right.
career bands rather than like 67 different specific roles, which would have been a nightmare.
Yeah. Okay, so moving on to some IT systems. Our benchmarking data shows that overall teams utilize more than one IT system, HRIS, case management, tax, to manage global immigration programs. What's the best practice here? I mean, I know that regularly foreign nationals don't have their login, need it
Yeah.
reset. How are you advising your client contacts managing all these different elements of the program that then
Yeah.
have different tools and platforms associated with it?
Yeah, no, it's a challenge. The number of people handling things is decreasing. The number of systems they have to keep track of is increasing.
Yeah,
Technology is great, but sometimes there can be too much of a good thing with all these different systems. If they can manage to do so, some in-house teams have more flexibility with what they're doing than others, but seek to streamline, seek to reduce the number of systems that you're using on a regular basis. See if some of those systems might be able to integrate with one another so that you're not having to do data entry in triplicate. Rapid, the platform we use, integrates with a lot of different other programs like Workday and things like that. So reducing the lift in terms of how many systems people are having to log into and particularly to enter data into. If you're thinking about bringing in a new system, kind of establishing a vetting process to make sure that you understand how it's going to function with your existing kind of portfolio of technology and if it will integrate, and really putting a premium, I think, on going for systems that integrate with one another, because I unfortunately think we're going to lose the battle of like having one system that does absolutely everything for
right.
us. Like that's probably a dream that is not attainable in the very near future. So I think the next best thing is just making sure the systems that you have and that you bring on integrate with one another so they're not adding to your workload.
We want to buy the compatible Lego set.
Yes,
That's what
do
we're looking
not buy the
for.
Duplo and the Lego and try to put them together.
Yeah, exactly. Can't buy that off-brand stuff. This kind of piggybacks onto, single versus multiple vendors.
Yeah.
And not shockingly, majority of teams use multiple vendors globally, with 46% of teams using multiple vendors by country and or region, 41% using a single vendor. I actually think that's pretty high. 11% using multiple vendors for different reasons, and 3% of programs managing all US and non-US immigration without a vendor in-house. So that's definitely the anomaly there.
Yeah.
So, when you've got multiple vendors, you're probably in multiple systems, but, what's your take on mitigating issues with multiple vendors? Do you think
Yeah.
it's a benefit? Like, what's your take on sort of the landscape within
Yeah.
multiple vendors and global program management?
Yeah, I mean, I don't think that, again, kind of like this IT system that will magically do everything for us, to have one vendor that does absolutely everything you need and does it fabulously, I think is the potentially the dream. In reality, there's different reasons why you might need or why you might end up with multiple vendors. I think to the extent it is a conscious choice that the best fit for your needs is to have multiple vendors, but maybe because of their specialization or their geographic coverage, that's great. If you end up with kind of a hodgepodge of different vendors, though, perhaps because there's been some M&A activity or, just one VP likes one provider, another VP likes another, I would encourage folks to try to take a step back and see if there is a way to consolidate that, because I think in that sort of a situation where having the multiple vendors hasn't been a conscious choice, it can really result in more work rather than less for the in-house teams. And it might be time to, bite the bullet and go to RFP or, find a way to consolidate and to streamline and make sure you've got what you need. Because also when you have multiple vendors, I think you have, multiple tech systems, multiple contacts. You have maybe a reduced level of leverage with vendors because you're not as large of an account as you would be if everything was
Sure.
consolidated. So I think there are a lot of significant pros to reducing the number of vendors that you have helping you.
That's a good point. I like the idea of like understanding if it's a conscious choice or not, because I know a lot of folks that step into a global mobility role and did not, have a smooth handoff because predecessor left before they onboarded, and step into a system that was built and that you think that it was built intentionally. But I think, after taking some time to observe, start questioning like, how did we get here? Because I think some of the stories we have are like, no one knows how it happened. Or we've opened up relationships or engagements where there's like not an
Yeah.
underlying engagement letter with no KPIs, or
Yeah.
it's like unclear what they're being billed, how they're being billed. And they just assumed it was, an established relationship where it might have been more ad hoc and that the predecessor was pivoting because of some global challenge. So there's probably some reason, but it's probably not to your point, like a really thought out, and does this fit where the program is going when, our clients are stepping into those leadership positions. Wrapping up here, our Global Immigration Program Alignment Survey, the top takes are client contacts, 1 to 2 folks leading these global programs more and more are shouldering a lot, especially in the dynamic state of 2025. I know it's not just the US going through changes in administration, but the US and the UK has had some overhaul, which we understand are top jurisdictions. So
Canada's going through a lot
Canada,
too.
that's right, of course. And that those are among the top jurisdictions our survey noticed. So programs are largest in the US, Canada, and the UK. And with those changes, the global mobility leaders are going to be very busy, going to be really dizzy with how to manage and navigate all this change. So, surveys like this, I guess, are a pulse of where programs are at, how folks are feeling. There's a lot more, I would call it qualitative data in this survey with a lot of feedback on not just the pain points, but also how different programs and global mobility leaders are addressing those pain points. So if you haven't had a chance to look at the survey or want to dive in more deeply, take a look at our benchmarking collective on LinkedIn, as well as sign up for our next survey. We'll be launching our Q1 benchmarking survey in the coming weeks. Audrey, any concluding thoughts on the Global Program Alignment Survey?
No, I think just, to those 1 to 2 people managing these big programs, hang in there. I think 2025 is gonna be a challenging year, but just, try to be strategic about it and definitely lean on your vendors and on your technology to support you in this.
Fantastic. As always, Audrey, thank you for your time and your expertise, and you'll be back as my podcast best friend. So thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me, Laura. Always fun.
Catch you next time.